Yes.
Good enough. Right, bud.
You opened before?
I did.
The starring of the 4th of July parade?
Would I want to go fishing? I did. Well, you're just talking about that.
Got off the red sand out in the north.
All right. The guys over here was just asking. We did slow fishing. He caught some snapper.
I caught my body weight in red snapper. Yeah, you can go over there.
I don't do it regularly. I got a lot of friends that I'm not that good of a fisherman that I can specify that I never catch this fish on this weighted tackle with a fly rod.
So once you do it, they say it's like hunting more than fishing. But for me, fishing is a social endeavor.
Fish bite for 8. I love it. Yeah, the water management district is doing their Peace Corps communication to work on their end, but they know that it's coming, so they're doing whatever the plan would look like. They know they have to move these shrubs, this dirt, do basic things in that way. They're starting to do that basic stuff.
Haven't just been on the road by itself.
That's the strategy. That is one of the people that we should go through is the West Coast, and the West Coast has got to be the freshwater for the ecology director, which they don't normally get.
Right.
They need 1,000, they don't have 300. So they've been getting what they needed all winter for good ecology, which has to be
Somebody was telling me that they're seeing more of the good, healthy grasses in the lake than before.
They don't know what people want to do, right? And so when they keep the water, you have to slip.
And then is there an argument that when that grass is allowed to grow, then that's a nutrients, one of those discharging from what's going to be
that's what we were talking about. Should come and set up those before
yeah, discussing it.
I was here, come back this time this year.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, good management.
I know a lot of them from fire
On the wet road, some of the rainfall.
no question. But there's preparation on that also. First discharge the curve to make this season. If you prep it by having it lower before rain coming over you, you protected the residents, and you protected the other people from having to get discharges to protect those.
So if you send it in the winter, then it's cold water.
Yep.
And it's not warm now.
That's exactly right. That's a great point. That's right. That's the one.
Climate change is real.
What they need. They need.
Oh yeah, without that, I wonder if the salinity levels at different times affect, like, when all those reef fish and breeding issues.
That's smart.
Because I mean, we get in our big system, all that biomass we're starting to develop more domestic industry there. That's cool. But hey, Will, good to see you, man.
You're welcome.
No house to house that'll work. We don't.
Thanks, buddy.
Can always depend on the house to show up.
That's what we say.
We're not deeming it.
Y'all ready out there? Okay, I'm Senator Graham from South Carolina. I'm here to announce with my colleagues the formation of a bicameral Roosevelt Conservation Caucus named after Teddy Roosevelt, one of the great conservationists of our time, a Republican. We're all proud of him. And what we want to do is build on what President Trump talked about a couple of days ago. From a Republican point of view, I think we need to showcase that we care about conservation, we care about the environment, and we have innovative solutions that are not top-down regulatory solutions. We believe that you cannot have a healthy environment and destroy the economy. And we believe that our friends on the other side care about the environment, but they care so much they're going to destroy the economy in the name of saving the environment. That is a false choice. America is the solution, not the problem, when it comes to carbon emissions. I wish China and India were doing what we're doing. We're lowering carbon emissions by allowing the private sector to come up with technology that the consumer wants. And President Trump should be proud of the fact that we have clean air and clean water, and we can always do better. And it is our goal to do better. Simply put, we believe in innovation when it comes to solving environmental problems, not regulation. We believe you can have a healthy environment and still fly a plane and eat a hamburger. That our friends on the other side have presented extreme solutions that will not help the environment but destroy the economy. And I'll just finish with this. Every American who cares about the environment also should care about a strong economy. Without a strong economy, you don't have the resources to do the things necessary. And as to the other parts of the world, we wish you would follow America's lead. How do you solve the climate change issue and give China and India and other major powers a pass? So rather than beating up America, we want to celebrate what we've accomplished as a nation, build on what we accomplished. We're not anywhere near where we need to be, but we're actually leading the world, and the way we're leading the world is relying on the private sector in partnership with the government to create a healthy environment and a strong economy. And speaking of a healthy environment and a strong economy, I have Senator Daines, who lives in one of the most beautiful places in the entire world, and I will now turn it over to him.
Thanks, Lindsay. That beautiful place in the entire world is called the state of Montana. Very fortunate. I had
Not a Great Lakes state.
We have some Great Lakes, we do. But I didn't get to choose my great-great-grandmother, but she homesteaded in northern Montana, and that began our legacy 5 generations deep in Montana that I'm very grateful for. I grew up in Bozeman. Bozeman's literally in the shadows of Yellowstone National Park, the very first national park in this country, 1872. In fact, some believe it was the first national park in the world there in Yellowstone. And I believe that as Republicans, we need to lead on the issue of conservation. We have the solutions that will actually grow the economy and protect the environment. As Lindsay said, those really go hand in hand. A prosperous America will lead to a nation that can continue to protect clean air and clean water. One of the great compliments I had one time from a reporter, they called me the conservative conservationist. And that's what I stand for. And I'm grateful for this Roosevelt Caucus, bicameral caucus. We have members of the House and Senate here today who want to lead and are passionate about protecting our environment and leaving the next generation with a better environment than we inherited from our parents. When we saw what happened in the Senate earlier this year in a 92-8 vote, that great public lands package where we permanently reauthorized LWCF, where in my home state we protected Yellowstone National Park with the Yellowstone Gateway Act just north of Yellowstone. It's a river that I fly fish on. I'll be fly fishing on in August during the recess. It took public lands to bring divided government together. This is an issue that can unite this city, bring Republicans and Democrats together with pragmatic solutions that will indeed continue to lead towards clean air, clean water, and protecting our environment. We need to move forward here on forest management reform. President Trump had a great event in the White House on Monday, which I attended. He talked a lot about forest management. Either we are going to manage our forests or our forests are going to manage us. We've got to deal with the wildfire situation that we have, and we can reduce the risk of wildfires and the severity of those wildfires by better forest management practices. We need to eliminate the maintenance backlog in our national parks, some $13 billion maintenance backlog. I chair the National Park Subcommittee on Lisa Murkowski's Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. We must address this issue, and I think we have a great shot of bringing Republicans and Democrats together to invest about $13 billion or more in our national parks. Though really I call our national parks the Department of First Impressions. Many international visitors, when they come to America, the first place they visit will be a national park. And we need to protect these national parks and continue to invest in them. And lastly, and I know we have Senator Burr here who's been leading on this issue, which is not only to permanently reauthorize LWCF, but to place it in mandatory funding and fully funded. That's the next fight we have here in Washington, D.C. LWCF, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, allows us to open up public lands that right now are closed and inaccessible to the public. And by investing in LWCF, it's a tool we can use here to provide better access to our public lands. So I want to thank Lindsay and his leadership here. Lindsay, who's up next?
Lisa,
Lisa Murkowski. Madam Chair.
we'll keep going west.
Going west. You can't come much further west. Welcome. Thank you. It's an opportunity this morning to highlight what a group of us on the House side, Senate side, led by my friend Lindsey Graham and others, to really focus on what it is that we are doing as a nation, what we're doing as Republicans to celebrate, to highlight, to elevate not only our public lands but our access. And it's that access that when we really think about the principles of conservation and what we work so hard to do to ensure that we have these incredible lands and waters available to us, to our families, for recreation, for hunting, for just enjoyment, hiking, viewing, whatever it may be. There is a good story. There is a strong story that comes with leadership over the decades when it comes to conservation. Unfortunately, I think as Republicans, oftentimes we just don't talk about it enough. And I'm not quite sure why we don't, because it is truly something worth celebrating. We have been moving forward with legislation, this Congress, in a manner that some have been critical of, saying that we haven't produced very much. I would just remind folks that the lands bill that we passed through the House, through the Senate, signed into law by the President, was a compilation of some 124 separate lands, water, and conservation measures. Measures that were clearly identified as bipartisan, measures that were supported by those of us from the West, from the East, from the South, measures that were so supported that when we passed it out of the Senate 92-8, the House took it up without changing a comma and moved it through with a very, very, very strong bipartisan vote. Just further demonstration of what our lands, what our waters can do to bring us together on these initiatives rather than separating us. And so as we work towards more opportunities to come together in a united way, focusing on those things that we truly identify with as Americans, whether it is our mountainscapes, whether it is our desertscapes, our wilderness, or our community parks, we have an opportunity to lead. So whether it is through doing better by our parks and dealing with our maintenance backlog, whether it is working to ensure that we're being responsible on our lands and addressing things like marine plastics. I guess that's on our waters. But we got marine plastics everywhere, so we're dealing with that too. But the reality that we can and should be doing so much more. We are poised to do it. We have good folks that are working with us, whether it's on our committees in EPW or in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, working with our colleagues on the House side. So I'm pleased to be part of a good, strong initiative this morning. Thanks, Lindsay.
Corey Gardner, happiest man in the Senate.
Thank you. Thanks to all my colleagues, both the House and the Senate, for being here today. We stand here today just a few months removed from passage of one of the most significant bipartisan lands bills, certainly in a decade, if not even longer than that. Within that legislation were a number of great accomplishments for conservation, for our environment. Legislation like the Land and Water Conservation Fund authorization. Legislation to assure our men and women fighting and protecting our forests and our communities have the tools that they need to defend and protect themselves and to defend and protect our forests and our communities. This legislation has a long-reaching generational impact. But there's more to be done. The Roosevelt Conservation Caucus is about leadership. It's about environmental leadership. It's about conservation. It's about taking opportunities that we know we can together in a bipartisan fashion succeed on. And tell the American people that we are going to give future generations, tell the people of Colorado, that we are going to assure them that the next generation is going to receive an environment in better condition, better shape, better health than the one that they inherited when they were born. That's what this effort is about. Every generation of Americans should expect a better place to live than they had the generation before. I'm proud to stand with my colleagues to officially launch this Roosevelt Conservation Caucus, a platform that will shine a light on the strong leadership and conservation, environmental stewardship of the Republican Conference and Caucus. In Colorado, we're blessed with an abundance of natural resources, a diversity of energy opportunities. Colorado is the state where Catherine Lee Bates over 100 years ago climbed up onto the top of Pikes Peak and wrote the words to America the Beautiful. Our purple mountain majesties, amber waves of grain. The Roosevelt Conservation Caucus is about protecting the majesty of this great United States. I support an all of the above energy policy. We're going to talk about that in the Conservation Caucus. It includes the use of traditional energy sources, coal, oil, natural gas. It talks about nuclear. It talks about renewable energy opportunities, wind, solar, hydroelectric power. We're not going to shy away from the things that will make this country a stronger, better, cleaner place. Keeping our nation at the forefront of energy research and development is critically important to the United States, to Colorado. We're home to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We're home to great institutions at the University of Colorado like NCAR and UCAR, work that we continue to do to focus on a cleaner environment. With clean and renewable energy resources, we will have abundant energy resources that we can continue to harvest and store from one season to the next through advancements in battery storage technologies. The Conservation Caucus will focus out on cleaning up our environment through passage of legislation like the Good Samaritan Bill, which will help so many of us in the West who have abandoned mines. We can do this with bipartisan cooperation. I'd say it's the spirit of the West. But on the platform here, you see members of Congress from across the country, from Michigan to Colorado to Alaska and beyond. That's what we have before us, an opportunity and a passion to protect the environment, to give future generations a better chance, a greater opportunity for the great land that we all love and share. I thank Senator Graham and the other hosts of this event today, and I'm proud to be a part and a co-leader of the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus.
Richard.
That's great.
Then we'll give the smart people here in a minute.
I thought we were going to sing American to you.
We should. We can do it. Man.
Lindsay, thank you. I spend most of my day trying to figure out how to stay away from this room and away from you guys and the cameras. But I think that gives you some indication as to how important I think this is. The John Dingell Lands Bill, I mention that because John Dingell was my teacher on conservation. As a junior member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, there was no greater conservationist than John Dingell. He believed that we should conserve and that we should make available for its use by every American that land that we set aside. We forget that part sometimes, and I hope it's going to be a mission of the Roosevelt Caucus to keep reminding America and legislators that what we set aside for the use of the American people. Steve Daines talked about the beauty of some of the national parks in his area. Well, you know, I happen to represent the state that has the most visited national park in America, the Great Smokies. Sometimes we forget it's not just the beauty of the West, it's the beauty of the East. It stretches from Alaska to North Carolina. It goes from Florida all the way to Michigan. And as we look at our accomplishments, not just this year, but as legislators, I think we're all asked the same question by students that come in and by business leaders. What's your greatest accomplishment, do you think, since you've been in Congress? I will still leave today knowing that, unlike Congresses of the past, this Congress chose to make permanent the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I can leave this Congress, I can leave this earth, then I know that my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren will have an opportunity to enjoy those treasures because this Congress was smart enough to make that permanent. No Congress will ever have to deal with whether it gets reauthorized. And like Senator Dane said, the next challenge is how do we fully fund it? I think this will be an easy leg of this process. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsey.
Richard, that is your legacy. Now to our House colleagues, Bryan Mass is the co-chair of the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus, and we'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, sir.
Bryan.
I love Lindsey. When we were outside the door, he said, should we flip back and forth between members of the Senate and members of the House? And I think maybe you meant that as a group, like all the senators first and then all the members of the House. But
Yeah, I didn't define it well.
We'll
that's why I love this
senator that
guy.
comes in late, so you may have to
Yeah, we see how it goes over here. Listen, as Republicans across the breadth of this country, we represent beautiful, lush, green, park-filled districts that we care about. You know, all of us were chatting beforehand. What were we doing over the 4th of July weekend? We were out there. We were fishing. We were going out there looking at birds, enjoying the outdoors, hiking through the woods. Everybody has their own story of what they're doing with their kids, or for our senators with their grandkids. And this is what we care about. And it's what we want to leave on to the next generation. For myself, I can tell you, the number one thing I work on every day is water back home, because it's what people care about. Where they can swim, where they can fish, where they can go out there and just look out at what's out there beyond the water, across the sea. It's what we care about, but we recognize that the ability for people to enjoy that and to affect that is also directly tied to their income. Somebody can't worry about the energy efficiency of their home if they're worried about where their next meal comes from. Somebody can't worry about the standards or the emissions of their automobile if they're worried about if they're going to work in the next day. And these things go hand in hand, and that's what we're talking about in this conference. We want everybody to be able to enjoy that, afford to be able to enjoy that, and afford to be able to participate in the better of our environment as a whole. And that's what this caucus is all about, and I think we're going to be very successful in that. So I'll pass that on to, I believe, to Mr. Upton.
Okay. Well, Will.
Or Mr. Hurd.
Co-chair.
I'll get over
We'll go up together.
Yeah, let's do that. You first.
Want me to go over?
Yeah.
Let me get Fred Upton from Michigan. Let me just say a couple of things. I'm delighted to be part of this important caucus. We do have divided government. Many of us, all of us, I hope, do care deeply about the environment and what we can do working together. This is a caucus, a group of members that I know pretty well, and I know that we're all committed to doing that, whether it's protecting the Great Lakes, our national parks, the legacy of our nation. One of the best books I ever read was River of Doubt, written by Candace Millard, who wrote about the life of President Roosevelt after he left office and what he did in his care of the environment worldwide. That's what this mission is. It's how we can work together. Climate change is real, and what we can do to really make a positive impact as he did. In essence, his footprints and fingerprints are still in this institution, looking over us to make sure that we, in fact, are doing the right thing. So I look forward to being a valuable member of this, and recognize my vice chair of this important caucus, Will Hurd from Texas.
Thank you, Fred.
Who did try to steal Great Lakes water, but it was before he was here.
That was before me. That was pre-me. That was pre-me.
Yeah. We're fighting the carp.
When I was a kid, I went on one family vacation
it was to Corpus Christi, Texas. I grew up in San Antonio. I'd never been to the beach. I'm excited. I'm 8 years old, and I run out into the water and immediately get stung by a jellyfish. And I don't go back to the beach until I was 22. And didn't go on another family vacation either. But now I represent 8 national parks in the great state of Texas. I also represent a third of the Eagle Ford Shale, the Delaware Basin, the Permian Basin, about half of the Permian Basin. I represent more energy production through wind and solar than any other congressional district. We can do both. We can maintain our beautiful parks and our environment, and we can make sure that this country continues this renaissance when it comes to energy. And so I'm looking forward to working with this group and making sure that, you know, our national parks, our environment's around for another 100 years, that we're encouraging, you know, Senator Daines, you said that $13 billion that needs to be fixed in deferred maintenance in national parks. $1 billion of that is in Texas. A lot of that is in my congressional district, and I want to make sure that the next 100 years these places are available for young kids, and I'm glad to partner with this group here.
Rob Portman, then we'll end with Matt, the anchor tenant here.
Sorry about that, Matt.
Hey, I'm used to it.
Matt's patient.
Yeah.
He's like 30 years old.
He's got lots of time. Well, thank you, Linz, very much. To Lindsay and to Corey on the Senate side, and to our House colleagues for putting together this group. I'm really proud that Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, and I think we're all proud of his legacy. And what better way to pay tribute to his legacy than to help restore our national parks at a time that they are crumbling. So the Restore Our Parks Act, which is something that Senator Warner and I, along with Senator Alexander, Senator King, and others have been promoting, is something that's long overdue. And by the way, it's classic Teddy Roosevelt legislation because it's about conserving. It's about actually a fiscally conservative way to make sure that we are good stewards of our incredible treasures, our national parks. By the way, we were talking about our national parks, and I feel a little east, kind of west friction going on here. In Ohio, we do have a bunch of national parks, 8, but we also have Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which is one of the top 13 visited parks in the country that you probably haven't heard of. And it's a spectacular park, and it's wedged between Cleveland, Ohio, and Akron, Ohio, meaning it's a suburban park, and some would even say in parts of it an urban park. And that's part of our legacy, too, that Teddy Roosevelt has left us that we need to restore. And there we do have a lot of deferred maintenance, part of the $13 billion. But this group has also been involved in a lot of other great issues. And we as Republicans sometimes don't tout our successes. The Tropical Forest Conservation Act is certainly one. We just reauthorized it in a Republican Senate, reauthorized in the House. This has saved millions of acres of tropical forests from destruction. They say about 76 million acres. This means that a lot of CO2 has not gone into the air because the forests have not been burned. This is probably the number 3 or 4 highest source of CO2 in the world, and it's being done through market forces. It's a debt for nature swap. It's countries that are willing to preserve their forests in exchange for us providing some relief on their debt, most of which would not have been paid off anyway. Another one would be what we're doing in terms of carbon sequestration and capture legislation that Senator Bennett and I have introduced that is, again, market-based in the sense that it gives utilities an incentive, a tax incentive under private activity bonds to be able to capture that carbon and then, again, to have a positive impact on CO2 emissions, but also create a market for CO2. And then the energy efficiency legislation. We've already passed it here in the Senate. We're going to get it reintroduced here soon. Gene Shaheen and I have been the co-authors of this over the years. This is the equivalent, they say, of taking 15 million cars off the road in 10 years in terms of the CO2 savings. Energy efficiency is something this group all supports. Teddy Roosevelt supported. Again, market-based approach saying, yes, we want to be able to use the energy that we have, and we want to use it more efficiently. And we can do that. We have a lot of opportunity and potential here in this country. So these are some of the exciting projects we're already working on as a group. We need to continue to promote, and in the legacy of Teddy Roosevelt, continue to ensure that we have a stronger economy, but also a cleaner and a better environment.
Matt?
The Library of Congress maintains an amazing collection of Teddy Roosevelt's pocket diaries, and you can flip through them and see the deep and abiding connection he had with the land, with the flora, and with the fauna. And it is a great thing for our country that is an enduring American value, the notion that we have a connection to the land that we value, that is important to us. I am grateful to be here under the organizing principle that as conservatives, every once in a while there ought to be a time we want to conserve something. And it's great to see the legislation that my colleagues have introduced and worked so hard on towards those ends. While our differences in this town do matter, nothing matters more than the fact that we all share the same planet. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to advance some of the solutions that don't divide us, but that unite us around energy efficiency, protecting the intellectual property of America's innovators, improving our electric grid, and of course making sure that our public lands are a launching off point for innovation and enjoyment of the environment that so many Americans really count as part of the unique American experience. And I thank Senator Graham for, as always, bringing together members of the House and Senate, unlike really anyone in this town is able to do. I'm proud to be here with you.
Thanks, man. It took us 30 minutes to get through all the members, which is a testament to this issue. I can't think of anything else that would get this many people together. Questions?
Senator Zach Coleman with Politico. President Trump earlier this week held an environmental news conference, didn't mention climate change. Republicans are talking more about climate change and innovation. I'm wondering, since you have the president's ear, do you think that he will eventually embrace this issue, and how will you get him to do that?
Well, I hope so, because I'll just speak for myself. I've traveled all over the world looking at this issue. When 9 out of 10 scientists say that CO2 emissions are creating a greenhouse gas effect and the planet is warming up, I believe the 9, not the 10, not the 1. I'm not a scientist. I have the grades to prove it, but I have really taken this issue to heart, and I would encourage the president to look long and hard at the science and fight the solution. I'm tired of playing defense on the environment. Look what you heard about that you probably never heard about. Look what we've actually done to set land aside, rehabilitate national parks, make America a better place for the future generations by thinking forward. So I would encourage the president to look at the science, admit that climate change is real, and come up with solutions that do not destroy the economy like the Green New Deal. We will win the solution debate, but the only way you're going to win that debate is to admit you got a problem. And this is a twofold approach here. Let's conserve what we have, and let's talk about climate change, in my view, from an innovative, not regulatory approach, trying to bring out the best in the private sector. You really don't have to ground all the airplanes and kill all the cows to have a healthy environment. Our friends on the other side are more alarmist than they are solution-based. There's not one Republican going to vote for anything that's coming out of the Green New Deal because it's crazy economics. We're hoping we can find solutions that some Democrats will vote for. And if you don't, you've done nothing but talk. And the goal of this caucus is not to talk about the environment, not talk about conservation, but to actually do something about it, working with Democrats if they'll meet us in the middle. Anybody else?
I would say that in the president's invigoration of the environmentalist movement, earlier this week, you can see the positive impact that Senator Graham, myself, and others in the administration have had on the president. And I think that as we move toward 2020, you're going to see the president talking more about the good work that his administration has done on the environment.
But the president still hasn't addressed climate change. He still doesn't believe in climate change. He still doesn't take steps on climate change.
Well, but he's done more to advance the solution sets than I think other presidents have. If you look at what President Trump has done to punish the Chinese for stealing all of our tech in solar, that is going to do more to solve climate change, I think, than all of the regulations in the world that'll just move coal and carbon-producing jobs offshore.
Is it planning to reduce the amount of fuel economy in vehicles, which would have, as the administration has even noted, a 500,000 barrel per day increase in gasoline?
But you heard Senator Graham point out that right now our innovations are leading the world in emission reductions, and I think it's a false premise to say that the only way that we continue to innovate is through the heavy hand of the government. We stand here for the alternate proposition that by unlocking innovation that you can create market-based incentives that aren't driven by compliance with a government plan.
Anybody else?
I have a question on a slightly more completely different subject.
Okay, we'll do that one later. Okay. Okay. I'll talk to you privately, yeah.
Some of the major oil companies are advocating for a carbon tax, carbon price, or carbon tax and dividend for citizenry. What do you think of that?
I'd like to know the economic impact, and I think taxing is something that most of us are leery about doing, because I think you said it well. If you can't make your car payment, you're probably more worried about that than you are the admission standards. So I don't know what ripple effect that would have on the economy at a time it's humming. And the one thing I have learned, being with Kerry and Lieberman years ago, is that the innovation coming from the private sector is going to do more to solve this problem than any government mandate. And I'm going to focus on that. Huh? Say what?
The oil companies are asking for it.
Who are they?
Exxon, BP, etc.
I'm sure they will pass it on to the consumer. Now, if they want to absorb it, all call me. Thank you.
Senator, can I just ask you about, you're going to the border. Can you stand at the podium? We have the camera set up.
You're going to talk about the border.
Okay. Going to the border. Okay.
You're going to the border.
Going to the border.
There's been a new report by NBC that there's been yet another detention facility on the border in Yuma, Arizona, that's had allegations of improper situations with migrants who have been there. What is going on in these facilities, and how much?
People are being asked to do things they're not capable of doing. The volume is too great. The amount of children involved is something the system was not set up to handle. The number of families that are being detained today has gone up by hundreds of %. The mix of illegal immigrants have changed from young men who are trying to evade capture to families with children who are turning themselves into the first Border Patrol agent they can find. I'm going to go look at the facilities, but I know what my message is going to be in general. There's not enough money in the system to handle the flow, and I'm not going to vote for $4 billion every 90 days until we address cutting off the flow. So to whatever inadequacies we have in housing people, the source of the problem is that the system is breaking. I'm not blaming the people on the border, I'm blaming us. The number of families being detained is through the roof. The number of unaccompanied children were 11,000 in 1 month. 50% of the Border Patrol workforce is dealing with taking care of families, not policing the border. So my hope is that we can strike an accommodation here. Money for Central America to go to the root cause of the problem. In return, changing our asylum laws for a period of time to cut off the flow. Turn on the aid, turn off the flow, and sort of regain control of the border.
When you see these allegations, though, of sexual assault and retaliation for protests, I understand the idea that there needs to be more resources, but I mean, these are allegations.
I was there in April. I was at that Yuma detention facility on a Codell with several of my House colleagues, and I could tell you that the Border Patrol agents and the Homeland Security employees that were there were dealing with conditions that they had not trained for, they were not equipped to handle, and they were doing the very best they could under terrible circumstances. The state of the human condition that I observed in Yuma was the worst state of the human condition I have ever seen in my life. Worse than some of the refugee camps I've seen in Jordan. Worse than an unair-conditioned AIDS hospital in Haiti. Because these people were racked and stacked. There was no space for them. And when we came back to Washington and begged alongside the administration for the additional resources as summer was approaching, not to have desperate people baking under tarps, we did not receive a whole lot of interest from our Democratic colleagues. It was only, very recently that they were able to agreed to the supplemental request that the administration needed. Those lost months between April and the summer will cost lives because you've got fragile people baking under the Arizona, Texas sun, and it was truly a horrible state of the human condition that I observed in Yuma. But the Department of Homeland Security officials that I witnessed, that I observed, were incredibly dedicated, and they felt a sense of obligation, despite the lack of training, to try to render aid to people who had nothing.
What's your reaction to these allegations of sexual assault and retaliation for protests in these facilities? Does this hit that same?
Yeah, this is why we have inspector generals. I mean, this is why it's so important for us to engage in robust oversight to see that that type of thing doesn't happen. Now, again, those are allegations; they have to be reviewed. But and of course, I wasn't a witness to anything like that. But I have personal knowledge of the conditions in Yuma during the precise time period that the inspector general issued their report, and the conditions that the human beings were in that I observed are entirely consistent with the severe incident reports that I have seen in terms of just how people were kept.
We'll have a system that will hold anybody accountable who engaged in criminal misconduct. Am I worried about it? Yeah. Do I want to make sure that Border Patrol agents follow the law and adhere to the highest standards? Absolutely. So we're going to hold them accountable. Who's going to hold us accountable? As we talk about what they're not doing, how about talking about what we're not doing? Who's the bad guy here? There may be a few bad apples, and I think that's true of any system. And we'll get those bad apples. But it's not their problem alone. We've created these conditions by inaction in Congress. And until we change our laws and address the root cause of the problem in Central America, this will be unsustainable, and you'll hear more allegations of mistreatment because the system is about to break. So I promise you that I'm in the camp that anybody in the military, Border Patrol, anybody else who hurts somebody, violates the standards, they're going to be held accountable. But nobody's holding us accountable. We're just pointing fingers. I'm going to go meet with the House tomorrow, Democratic members of the House, to see if we can come up with a bipartisan solution that would increase aid to Central America, because we should, and in return have a timeout on asylum claims being made in the United States. Let people apply for asylum in their home country, set up a facility in Mexico, take pressure off the border. Because right now, the word is out on the street in Central America that if you come to the United States with a minor child and you ask for asylum, they can only hold the child for 20 days. They let the whole family go because we don't want to separate, and your asylum hearing is years away, and people get released inside the country, which is their goal. The day they understand that you can't apply for asylum in America, you have to do it in your home country or Mexico, the flow will stop.
And there are Democrats who believe that. We've got border Democrats who actually stand for the proposition. Vicente Gonzalez has a bill that does very similar to what Senator Graham suggested.
Thanks, buddy. I'll talk later.